Right, welcome to Rugby Borough Council's Planning Committee meeting this Wednesday, the 11th of January. I am Councillor Tony Gillis, the chairman of this committee. The meeting is being web streamed to the public through the Council's YouTube channel. During the meeting, when asked to speak, please use the push to talk button on the microphone in front of you. This will allow the camera to pan in your general direction and everyone to hear you. Before we begin the formal agenda, I'm obliged to read out the following fire notice. There is no fire drill scheduled in the building this evening. If the fire alarm sounds, then please could I ask you that you make your way out of the building, down the main staircase and out of the main doors of the Town Hall and congregate at the entrance to Caldecott Park. An officer of the Council will give instructions on when it is safe to return to the building. I'm now going to move on to the agenda, and the first item of the business is to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of December 2022. All those in favour, please show. And that's unanimous. Second item is to receive apologies. Do we have any apologies?
One apology for tonight's meeting from Councillor Eccleston. Councillor Mrs. Borough is substituting.
Councillor Mrs. Brown.
Councillor Singh is delayed.
Thank you. We move on then to declarations of interest. First of all, we've got non-pecuniary interests as defined by the Councillor's Code of Conduct for Councillors. Councillor Sanderson.
.301 Clifton Road, by virtue of being within my ward.
Any others? Are we okay on that? B, pecuniary interests as defined by the Council's Code of Conduct for Councillors. No. And then C, notice under section 106, Local Government Finance Act 1992. We're all clear on that. Okay. And then we'll move on then to item number 4. And before we do that, we're just going to read out the rules of speaking. First of all, the planning officer will speak first and present the application. The representatives for the objectors, the applicants, and then the ward councillor, if there is one, will each be invited to speak. After each speaker, committee members will be asked if they have any points of clarification from the speaker. Any ward member or councillor who speaks on an application as part of the public speaking process will leave the meeting once all speakers have completed their presentations relating to it. Members of the committee will then go into debate on the application, asking relevant questions of the planning officer if necessary, and a formal recommendation will be made and voted upon. The rules for public speaking: speakers will have 3 minutes to make their representations. They will be warned by a short alarm when they have 30 seconds left, and then a further alarm will sound when their time has expired. Their presentation should then be brought to a halt. No extra time will be allowed. All speakers should direct their presentations to amplifying the planning matters they have previously put to us for the benefit of the Planning Committee. Speakers should restrict their comments to material planning considerations only. Any non-planning issues will be totally disregarded. Speakers should not introduce any additional information that has not been previously brought to the planning authority's attention, i.e. introduce late items that have not been suitably considered by officers and properly addressed in the officer's report to the Planning Committee for members' deliberation. No visual aids or handouts may be used, and no questions to officers or members will be allowed. No members of the public are allowed to take part in the debate once their presentation has been given. And so we move on to items for consideration, and the first one is with Ewan, 301 Clifton Road.
Good evening. This is a full planning application reference number R22/0171 at 301 Clifton Road for the change of use of a shop to a hot food takeaway, a single-storey rear extension and side extension, and a relocation of the existing side door. The application is being reported to the Planning Committee in accordance with the scheme delegation, as more than 15 letters of objection from households residing in the locality have been received, and Councillor Sue Roodhouse has called in the application on the following grounds: parking near the junction and the proximity of the pedestrian crossing, environmental impact of noise and smell, and no confirmation of opening hours. The picture on this slide shows the site location plan. 301 Clifton Road is on the corner of Clifton Road and South Street. The property was previously a bridal store but is currently vacant. So the Planning Committee on Wednesday, 9th of November, voted to defer determining this planning application so that consultation could be carried out between the Highway Authority, the Local Planning Authority and the applicant in regards to mitigation methods to prevent vehicles parking on / close to the crossing on the Clifton Road outside the site, and to make a request to the applicant to undertake a road safety audit. In consultation with the Highway Authority, Condition 4 is recommended to ensure details for the installation of bollards to prevent vehicle use on the footway between the South Street junction with Clifton Road and the existing pedestrian crossing adjacent to 305 Clifton Road is submitted to and approved by the LPA prior to above ground development commencing. The approved scheme shall be implemented in full prior to the first use as a hot food takeaway. The applicant has agreed to this condition. The LPA also requested the applicant undertake a road safety audit, and the applicant stated that he was happy to follow the expertise of the Highway Authority on the issue. The Highway Authority do not think it's reasonable to ask for a road safety audit to be undertaken at the planning stage, given the stage of the application and the relatively minor nature of the works. However, an assessment of risks will be required as part of discharging the condition in relation to the scheme of bollards, which may require a road safety audit. If required, this can be ensured through the provisions of the Highways Act 1980. On this basis, a road safety audit has not been undertaken at this stage. Here we have an aerial photo of the site, which shows the site and the proposed car parking spaces to the rear of the Clifton Inn. Signage to be approved will be displayed in the shop to direct customers to the proposed off-street car parking spaces. The approximate location for the scheme of bollards is also shown. Moving on to site photos, the first photo on this slide shows the side western elevation of the building taken on South Street towards the junction with Clifton Road. Photo 2 shows the front elevation of 301 Clifton Road, and photo 3 is taken from the rear of the application site, showing the proposed location of the extension. Moving on to the photos on this slide, photo 1 is taken along Clifton Road towards the town centre, and it's taken from outside 301 Clifton Road. It's also the approximate location of where the bollards are to be installed, where that red car is currently shown. Photo 2 is taken outside the Clifton Inn towards 301 Clifton Road, and then photo 3 shows the proposed location for the vehicle parking to the rear of the Clifton Inn, which the applicant owns. To facilitate the operations of the takeaway, internal and external alterations are required. In addition, a small side and rear extension is proposed, which will have dimensions of approximately a width of 1.5 metres, a length of 4.7 metres, and a flat roof height of 2.7 metres. The extension will be constructed out of brick to match existing and have a single ply membrane roof. To the rear, there will be a service yard, and space will be made to accommodate 4 undercover visitor cycle spaces and cycle spaces for the staff working there. The existing side door is also to be relocated. In terms of technical consultee responses, the Highway Authority have no objection subject to a couple of conditions, and they have also suggested a condition for the scheme of bollards. The Environmental Health Department state that the details and location of the extraction system is acceptable if properly maintained, and have recommended 4 informatives. The Work Services Department have recommended an informative to do with waste. In terms of neighbour comments, we've had 32 household objections to this application and a support petition with 149 signatures. A summary of the objections received generally relate to the car parking spaces at the Clifton Inn not being appropriate, the resulting highway safety issue and risks, the noise generated from the operation of the takeaway, smells and odour, litter, antisocial behaviour, and there's already a number of takeaways in close proximity, and the unhealthy food and the impact on health. A full summary can be found in the committee report. Moving on to the main considerations, in terms of the principle of development, the site is located within Rugby Town as defined by policy GP2, which is the most sustainable location within the borough and is the main focus for all development. Section 6 of the MPPF states significant weight should be placed on the need to support economic growth and productivity. The proposal will bring a vacant unit back into use, which will support economic growth and provide employment opportunities. In terms of character and design, the extension will infill the area between the existing side wall and the boundary wall at number 303 Clifton Road. The proposed extension and relocation of the side door will not have an adverse impact on the character and appearance of the area. 2 flues are proposed to the rear, which will project approximately 1 metre above the eaves of the building to ensure that the extraction system works efficiently. The benefits of the extraction system outweighs the minimal harm to the street scene. Moving on to air quality, odours, noise and litter, the extension will have a minimal impact on the air quality management area, and there will be a material increase of emissions linked to the proposed use compared with the previous use as a result of vehicle-generated visits to the site. However, the takeaway is situated in a residential area and should serve the local community with many properties within walking or cycling distance. Environmental Health Department did not raise any air quality concerns. The proposed extraction system will effectively mitigate smoke and odours to ensure residential properties will not be significantly impacted. The local planning authority recommend restricting the business opening hours to those outlined in condition 9 to ensure the takeaway will not generate noise at inappropriate times. The business will use the bin store to the rear, and condition 8 is recommended to ensure a litter management scheme is submitted to and approved in writing by us. In terms of impact on residential amenity, the proposed extension is not considered to cause a significant loss of light and overlooking over and above the existing situation. In terms of impact upon healthy lifestyles, the location of the takeaway opposite the Winfield Recreation Ground and in close proximity to 2 primary schools is noted. It's also acknowledged that the majority of food offered by hot food takeaways is not deemed to be healthy. However, due to the small-scale nature of the development, with only 1 unit offering takeaway food, this will have a limited impact on the overall role in creating and maintaining healthy communities, and ultimately people will have a choice and decide their own diets. And with the wide range of access and availability to unhealthy food, it is considered unreasonable to refuse the application on this matter. In terms of highway safety and parking, Section 9 of the MPPF makes it very clear that development should only be refused on highway grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impact on the road network would be severe. The parking standards within the local plan indicate that 16 car parking spaces, 4 visitor and 2 staff cycle spaces should be provided. 4 undercover secure visitor and additional staff cycle spaces are to be provided. 5 car parking spaces are proposed in the existing car park to the rear of the Clifton Inn, which the applicant owns. These are considered to be adequate and satisfactory. The distance to the Clifton Inn is approximately 130 metres, which is an approximate 1 minute 30 second walk. The takeaway should serve the local community, with many within walking and cycling distance. The installation of bollards, in addition to the existing traffic regulation orders on such close to the crossing outside the application site should prevent customers parking illegally outside the proposed takeaway. The Highway Authority has no objection, and therefore it can be determined that the proposal will not have a significant impact on highway safety or operation. It is important to note that the existing shop falls under use class E and can be converted to anything under this use class, e.g. a convenience store, without planning permission and off-street parking. No off-street car parking is proposed due to the constraints of the site, and any off-street car parking would remove on-street car parking capacity. The parking arrangement at the Clifton Inn is considered to be the best alternative. Moving on to the planning balance, the site is located within the most sustainable location in the borough, and the proposal will bring a vacant unit back into use, which will support economic growth and provide employment opportunities. The proposed extension and external alterations will not have an adverse impact on the street scene or on the residential amenities of the adjoining properties. The extraction system detail will protect the neighbouring properties from odours and smoke, and restricting the open hours will ensure the takeaway will not generate noise at inappropriate times. The car park spaces, in addition to the cycle spaces, are considered to be acceptable. The proposal is not judged to significantly impact highway safety and operation, and the installation of bollards further mitigates any concerns. The development is therefore considered to comply with the local plan and the MPPF, and therefore the recommendation is to approve subject to the conditions and informatives set out in the draft decision notice.
Okay, thanks for that, Ewan. Members, do we have any points of clarification for the officer? And bear in mind, only points of clarification. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, can I just raise a question about the signatures on the petition, which concerns have been raised about? Did they go through our normal channels in terms of validation of those signatures, and whether they were bona fide residents or above voting age?
So I can't confirm the validity of the petition, but a petition is a form of representation and we have to take it into account regardless. Now, the strength and the volume of the number of signatures is not in itself a material planning consideration, so it doesn't really matter whether 10 people sign the petition or, in this case, 147.
Thank you.
Councillor Sylvester.
Thank you, Chair. I think still the traffic issue is tremendous in that area. I know Ballard is going to solve some ways. Have you any contact with the residents in the area? Because road safety audit is an issue. And while the Warwickshire Authority does the road safety consideration, do they consult the residents? Because traffic issues are different at different times. And that's quite a big issue, I think. It will have a great impact on the road traffic. Still, I feel, even after the Ballard.
So we consult the residents on all planning applications. The Highway Authority, I'm not aware that would consult on when they consult, provide a response to us. So yeah, the residents have had their say, but they're not sort of consulted again, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Right, okay. Councillor Mrs Brown.
Thanks. It's a quick one, really. It's about traffic. I'm curious to know what the predicted volume of customers is at busy periods for that particular takeaway? And has the traffic analysis taken into account things like Deliveroo and Just Eat and the prospect of quite a few vehicles sort of collecting in that place is quite likely.
So in terms of the point you've just raised, when the Highway Authority, when we consult the Highway Authority, they use their sort of expertise and the data they have to provide with this recommendation. Now they would have looked at the proposed application and the use proposed and come to their consideration and a recommendation. They're of the view that this will not have a detrimental impact on highway safety or operation.
Councillor Daly.
Thanks, Chair. On 14.3 of the report, it says that in accordance with the parking standards contained within Appendix 5 of the local plan, 16 car parking spaces as well as cycle spaces should be provided. And a little bit further down, the report admits that this application doesn't meet the advised parking standards. Why, in your opinion, is it considered on balance that the hot food takeaway will have adequate and satisfactory parking available when it's so far away from that 16 number for an 80 square metre building?
It is a balanced consideration and balanced view. Essentially, the location of the takeaway is in a highly residential area, so you would expect people to walk or cycle. The applicants have been very, very willing to provide cycle spaces, which a lot of hot food takeaways don't provide. So this is part of the consideration. Another one is the fact that the building could be converted into anything under use class E without planning permission and have zero off-road car parking spaces. Any car parking spaces on site would just remove on-street car parking capacity. So it is a balanced consideration.
Councillor Lewis, did you have a point of clarification?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's in relation to paragraph 1.4 on the road safety audit. It indicates that one may be done, but later on, not at this stage. I would have thought, since that is an important aspect, the safety of the road, that road safety audit should be done as early as possible. And can you explain why? Could the officer explain why it's being left until a later date?
Essentially, the Highway Authority feel that the proposed works are quite minor in nature to acquire a road safety audit. Now, an assessment of risk will be undertaken when the bollards is to be submitted, but there's not one at this stage due to their recommendation and their expertise.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then we'll move on now to our objector who's speaking, Ms. Christine Marriott. You have 3 minutes.
As residents, we raised concerns regarding the increase of vehicles parking on the Pelican Crossing hazard warning lines, which are directly outside this building, blocking the view when trying to exit South Street. Planning proposals to erect extra bollards on the pavement to stop this kind of hazardous parking is preposterous. How will this solve the issue of drivers parking on the hazard lines on the road? The increase in traffic will be significant once this outlet opens. Uber and Just Eat drivers, supplier vehicles, customer vehicles, all fighting to park 130 yards away in the 5 spaces provided. Does planning realistically believe that these cars and vans will do this? As a long-term resident, I don't. Every day I see the hazards created in my street with vehicles trying to drive up South Street, trying to pass each other, having to wait there while there is a food delivery or when the refuse van blocks the road. Then cars try to exit at South Street with poor visibility due to the cars parking just where they like. How long will it take before there is an accident, and what will people say? Bad planning. We have children playing in the park directly opposite this shop. We have school buses dropping children off at one of the busiest times of day. All these children have to cross Clifton Road. A Pelican Crossing and the hazard warning lines provided by highways are supposed to protect pedestrians and these school children. What if all this increased traffic and inappropriate parking causes an accident? Who will the residents blame for the chaos and potential dangers? They will blame Rugby Planning for approving a fast food takeaway in one of the most inappropriate places imaginable, on the corner of a narrow terrace street on a busy junction, a Pelican crossing with hazard warning marks directly outside the shop. The Facebook campaign would be scathing. We mentioned food smells impregnating our homes. No filter this close to our houses will prevent this. How many people in this room can honestly say they do not smell food odours when they're near a takeaway? We mentioned litter, but according to planning, it is ultimately the choice the customer makes. Well, that's okay then. Is this what we call area regeneration? A fast food outlet opposite a children's play area, close to 2 schools and opposite a school bus drop-off point is totally inappropriate. Does any individual in this room believe that children make healthy food choices? We only have to look at McDonald's success and see that they don't. And is the size of this establishment even relevant? A small burger van still sells vast quantities of unhealthy food. Does Rugby Planning not think that we need to contain the number of fast food restaurants in Rugby? We already have 2 McDonald's and many other establishments. Do Rugby Planning not care about Rugby and its residents? There is a reason this type of planning application has already been refused twice for this building, and as I only have 3 minutes to speak, the aforementioned has just scratched the surface of the reasons for refusal. The annual NHS spend on obesity-related diseases is 6.5 billion. Just a 10% reduction in obesity prevalence could lead to significant cost savings equivalent of 6 billion a year.
Thank you for speaking. Excellent. Now, members, do you have any points of clarification for Miss Marriott? Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you. Is your primary concern road safety in all this?
Yes, absolutely. The road safety on Clifton Road where there's a Pelican crossing, yes.
Okay, any further points of clarification from the objector? No? And we haven't got a ward councillor to speak, but we'll then, in that case, move into debate. Councillor Willis.
Thank you, Chair. Bollards apart, I'm not sure that we've particularly moved forward from the November committee, the issue of parking. We've been let down by the Highways Authority. An audit, a road safety audit, would perhaps have given us the answers we required. Clifton Inn, we discussed on the night, is not an appropriate alternative for parking. Do we really expect people to walk, 130 metres, a minute and a half away, backwards and forwards? It won't happen. We still have the same problem. I think it's been highlighted exceptionally well by the objector. What can we do to generate a road safety audit? Because I think if we had that in front of us and the results of that, we could make an informed decision. As it is, we make a decision on what is in front of us and we do not have the full information. I think Councillor Daly captured the number of spaces, which again were dismissed further in the report. We simply do not have the answers that we requested at the November meeting. And I think we need that if we are to make an informed decision. Thank you.
I can only really reiterate what the Highway Authority said to me about the road safety audit. They have day in and knowledge and expertise and the data to provide us with a reasoned recommendation, and if it would be amiss to sort of go against their advice. We can't really force the applicant to undertake a road safety audit. It really has to come from the Highway Authority, and in this case they think the works are too minor to achieve one.
I take your point, and this is, and thank you for the report, by the way. This is in no way a criticism of yourself. It is a criticism of the Highway Authority. We have 140 something signatures. members of the residents in the borough, I think that merits some sort of intervention from the highway authority. Takeaways and parking are notorious. I speak from experience in a village where every Friday and Saturday our village is clogged up. We have yet to have an accident, and I hope we never do. But again, it's that issue of parking and people taking risks, etc., and buses being stopped. I think it's been summarised. That road safety audit is the expert view. We don't have the expert view. We have the expert view saying it doesn't need one, but that leaves us with the gap in between. We are where we are, but we did ask for clarification on this in November, and I don't think we've got it. And again, Ewan, just to be crystal clear, not a direct criticism of the work you've done. Thank you.
Can I come back on that? I think the issue is that there are existing TROs at the junction. The bollards would further mitigate any problems to stop vehicle parking by the crossing. Now, ultimately, people do have a choice in where they park their car. If they park illegally, that does fall outside the remit of planning, and it's not something we can take into consideration tonight.
Thanks, you.
We've got a number of speakers. First, Councillor Sevastova.
I think I fully agree with Councillor Will's comments. We deferred it on the basis to get a road safety assessment, and we haven't got in our front to that one. I don't know whether we can defer it again or not. That again, I have to ask the legal expert. But I think we haven't got that assessment. And how can we make a judgment when the public is saying that this is a danger to them? School children are in danger. So road assessment is absolutely necessary for us to make a judgment.
Just to be clear, you of course can always defer the application as many times as you like. I think the difficulty we have here is that the Highways Authority aren't going to do a road safety audit, and we can't force the applicant to do one. So it's looking at what do we do if we defer and it's still not going to come back. Are we going to be in a constant cycle of deferrals? You obviously have the ability to defer, but I'm not sure it's going to produce the outcome you're desiring.
Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I think we need to take this application, have an overview of this application, not just look at it within a narrow confine. We know that ever since the Houghton development, traffic volume has been increasing both on Hillmorton Road and Clifton Road. The local parade along there is quite busy and always has been quite busy, but it's becoming more and more congested. Councillor Willis is absolutely spot on. Warwickshire County Council highways have let us down badly. It's not just this audit. There were sums set aside for environmental enhancements of the highway on Clifton Road when the Houghton development was first set off. So why did they do such a very poor job of that crossing in the first place? Now, in terms of the yard, and it is a yard, I've had many a tonnage of waste, fly-tipped waste removed from that yard over the years. Then saying it's appropriate parking just doesn't rub it. It doesn't really do the trick. Should this application go through tonight, then I feel that we could have the same environmental problems that we had in the past. In terms of the bollards, I think it needs more than bollards. It needs bollards and proper railings so that it directs pedestrians to the right area, not crossing in the wrong areas, which could lead to a fatality. And it is regularly used, as the local resident has said, in terms of children and families crossing that road to the park. I would like to move refusal on the grounds that this application fails to meet on-site parking provision. And I believe that is an honest assessment where this application is.
Thanks for that, Councillor Sanderson. Have we got any further speakers? Councillor Daly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add that I support what Councillor Sanderson has said there. I'm just checking back over the appendix in the local plan, and I appreciate what the officer says, that this could become an off licence or a newsagent. However, they don't require as many parking spaces, and I think the world has changed actually since this local plan was written, and we've all seen the problems in our local communities. We see it in Hill Morton with the well-known pizza a takeaway which is opened up, and the parking that does require. So I agree with Councillor Sanderson. You know, policy D2 of our local plan says that a hot food takeaway of this size would require 16 on-site parking spaces, and it doesn't have that. So I'll support Councillor Sanderson.
Right, have we got any further speakers? No, so we've got a proposer and a seconder for refusal. All those in favour, please show. Well, that looks like it's unanimous to me. Thank you. We're going to do the... Welcome, Councillor Slinger. It has been noted. But have you got any declarations of interest that we need to note? Thank you. That was a no. Brilliant. The next item is 46 Grosvenor Road, and we've got Ewan presenting yet again.
So this is a full planning application reference number R22/1081 at 46 Grosvenor Road for the proposed change of use of a dwelling to a 7-room HMO, including a single-storey rear extension and 2 new dormer windows. The application is being reported to the Planning Committee in accordance with the scheme of delegation, as Councillor Harrington called in the application following concerns regarding a number of HMOs in the street, antisocial behaviour, there not being enough facilities for existing residents in relation to parking and house prices. Picture shows the site location plan. The application dwelling is a 2-storey mid-terrace 3-bedroom property. Grosvenor Road has a mixture of single dwellings, flats and HMOs. There are 186 separate addresses within Grosvenor Road, and 7 of these are licensed HMOs, which equates to approximately 3.76% of the street. One additional HMO would equate to approximately 4.3%. This slide shows the aerial photo, which shows the location of the site in the context of the surrounding streets, with Murray Road to the west and Claremont Road to the east. To the southern side of the property is an alleyway which leads to the private amenity space for number 46, which will allow bins to be moved to the curb on collection day and access to bicycles to utilise the cycle store proposed to the rear. There is no relevant planning history pertinent to this application. Moving on to site photos. Photo 1 shows the front elevation of 46 Grosvenor Road. Photo 2 shows the private amenity space to the rear of the property. And then photo 3 shows the rear elevation of the property, including the lean-to structure and the alleyway. Photo 1 on this slide shows a close-up of the existing lean-to extension to the rear, which is to be removed and replaced by a single-storey rear extension. Photo 2 shows an L-shaped dormer at number 50 Grosvenor Road, which is similar to the dormer proposed under this application. In terms of floor plans, the ground floor will comprise of 2 rooms, a WC, and a kitchen and living area. The first floor is to comprise of 3 rooms, and the second floor, 2 rooms courtesy of the proposed dormer. All rooms will have ensuite bathrooms. Condition 6 is recommended to restrict the HMO to 7 occupants. It should be noted that not all conversions of residential properties to HMO require planning permission. The change of use to a small HMO defined as being 6 or fewer occupants does not require planning permission. This is for 7 occupants, so this application is required essentially for the 1 additional occupant. Moving on to the elevations, the application includes 2 extensions, the first being a single-storey rear extension which replaces the lean-to which we saw in the picture earlier, and it will create a larger kitchen and living area. The extension partially infills the rear part of the dwelling and the rear projecting outrigger. The extension will be approximately 1.7 metres in width, length of 5.2 metres, and a flat roof height of 3.2 metres with a roof lantern. The extension is to be constructed out of matching brick and a single ply membrane roof. The second extension is the proposed L-shaped dormer, which will be located on the main roof slope to the rear and on the roof plane of the outrigger. The dormer will be mostly tile hung with brick rear sides and a single ply membrane roof. 2 windows are proposed on the rear elevation of the dormer and 1 obscure glazed window in the side elevation. Alterations are proposed to the existing dwelling, which include 2 roof lights to be inserted on the front roof slope. An existing window in the side elevation at first floor level will be altered to 2 obscure glazed windows, and an existing window on the rear elevation will be replaced. So a bin and cycle store are proposed. A bin store they'll both be in the rear garden of the property. The bin store will be able to accommodate 3 recycling and 3 black bins, and the cycle store is proposed next to the bin store, and it will be able to accommodate 10 bicycles. Their location is shown in the bottom right image to the rear of the garden area. In terms of technical consultee responses, the Highway Authority have no objection. Ecology recommend informatives to do with bat and bird note, and the Environmental Health Department have no objection, subject to a condition and a few informatives. We've had 11 household objections to this application. A summary is that a summary of the objections received is to do with the degradation of the area, being too many HMOs apparently causing families to move out, a loss of community, rubbish and litter, lack of parking, disabled bays being used inappropriately, parking on double yellow lines. Apparently there's 9 HMOs already in the street, and stress on doctor surgeries with more residents, and constant building work, and the impact on property values. In terms of the principle of development, the site is located within Rugby town. It is the most sustainable location in the borough, and it has a wide range of access to services and facilities, and is the main focus for all development. In terms of character and design, the external works are acceptable as they are to the rear of the property and would have little impact on the street scene. A replacement single-storey rear extension is an improvement on the existing lean-to structure. External alterations and the bicycle and bin store are to the rear of the property and will not have a significant impact on the character and appearance of the area. The roof lights at the front would be flush with the front roof plane and have no discernible impact on the character or appearance of the dwelling within the street scene. The proposed extension seeks to use similar materials to the existing dwelling, with the dormer cheeks clad in tile to match. which would be conditioned accordingly. In terms of impact on residential amenity, the external alterations will not impact the residential amenities of the surrounding properties. The external amenity space is considered to be of an acceptable size, and the HMO will be subject to a separate licensing process to ensure, with legislation separate to planning, any noise, waste, parking or antisocial behaviour complaints would be dealt with separately. In terms of highway safety and parking, again, the NPPF states that development should only be refused on highway grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impact on the road network would be severe. Parking standards state that each HMO should be considered on its own merits. Grosvenor Road and the surrounding roads are permit controlled. Each property, regardless of its use as a HMO or a C3 dwelling house, is eligible for 3 permits plus a visitor permit. The Highway Authority has no objection to the application. Grosvenor Road has designated parking bays along with adequate junction protection in the form of double yellow lines and other TROs to ensure vehicles do not park where they should not. The proposal will therefore not have a detrimental impact on highway safety. It is acknowledged that the property may have an increase in the number of occupants over the current use, which may increase the number of associated vehicles. However, the permit controls will likely mean the number of vehicles associated to 46 Grosvenor Road will not exceed the number of permits available to the property, despite the operational hours. I also mentioned earlier that 6 occupants, a 6-occupant HMO does not require planning permission. This application essentially seeks 1 additional occupant. The site is located in a sustainable area with access to an array of services and facilities accessible by foot, bicycle or public transport, and the cycle shed reduces the reliance on the car. In terms of ecological considerations, the application is not anticipated to impact upon protected species, and a condition is recommended to ensure the development is air quality neutral or to secure appropriate mitigation. In terms of the planning balance, the site is located within the most sustainable location in the borough, with access to a range of services and facilities. External works will not have a significant impact on the character and appearance of the area, and the proposals would not have an unduly detrimental impact on the amenities of the surrounding properties. The proposals are unlikely to have a detrimental impact on highway safety and operation. It's considered that the development complies with the local plan and the NPPF. Therefore, planning application R22/1081 is recommended to be approved, subject to the conditions and informatives set out in the draft decision notice appended to the officer report.
Right, have we got any points of clarification for the officer? Looks like Neil Sanderson hot on the mark again.
Just a point of clarification. The drawing doesn't tell you a great deal, but in terms of members can get some idea of the development itself, has it increased much in terms of scale and massing?
So there's 2 extensions. The dormer is a cubic volume of approximately 42 cubic meter. The volume is 42 cubic meters, and then the extension is approximately 5 by 1.7. So the dormer is quite big, but the extension not so much. But a dormer could be constructed in the permitted development if it was below 40, so it's just over that threshold. That's why it needs planning permission.
Councillor Daly.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick point of clarification. This is just for my own understanding. Firstly, thank you for putting the percentages in of the HMOs. I think that's really, really interesting context. But I just had a question. You know, a smaller HMO, a 6-bed HMO, would that still be included in that number of HMOs on Grosvenor Road on the public register, or is it only HMOs that are 7 bedrooms or more?
So the public register is done by a licensing team. That's a separate, and they have their own sort of definition. I believe it's more than 5 bedrooms. I might be wrong, but they have their own sort of threshold.
Councillor Willis.
Thank you, Chair. On the issue of licensing and planning, and on occasion we veer from one into the other at this committee, particularly with the sometimes emotive issue of HMOs. Could you just give us a little clarification of where one starts and one stops, particularly with this crossover number? And I know that we have the chair of licensing here this evening as well. It would be interesting to know so we don't again stray into the wrong areas, shall we say. Thank you.
So the licensing process usually happens after planning permission, if planning permission is required for a HMO. Now, licensing is completely separate to planning. We can't take what they consider into consideration. We have to determine this application in accordance with the local plan unless material planning considerations indicate otherwise. Now, licensing have their own sort of procedure. They look at whether the management is fit and proper to run the HMO. They look at the management standards. They look at whether the HMO is suitable or is to be made suitable for the number of tenants occupying it. They look at the number, type and quality of the bathrooms and the shared facilities, and all HMOs must comply with the council's standards of amenities. That's their sort of licensing process they go through.
Thank you.
Before we move on to Councillor Brown, we've just got a few words from Sarah.
So, Councillor Daly, just to clarify your earlier question, a house in multiple occupation from the government's point of view is any property rented out by at least 3 people who are not from the same household. However, from a licensing point of view, they only become interested when there are 5 or more people. So it would capture more than would require planning permission on the register, but not necessarily all of them.
So that's it, Sarah. Councillor Brown and then Councillor Slinger.
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested to know what evidence is used to assess the impact on residential amenities. There seem to be a list of residents who think there's quite substantial impacts on amenities.
This is in terms of, this isn't to do with licensing, this is now to do with the extensions proposed.
Just run that past me again, I'm sorry to be slow.
This isn't
What's
to do...
difference?
Planning, yeah, okay, good. So the single-storey extension is located between the boundary wall and the outrigger. Now, the outrigger would already block a lot of light,
yes.
So that has to be taken into account. Now, so that's why we say there's going to be no significant impact over and above the existing situation, because the outrigger projects further than the extension will do, and it's 2-storey high. In terms of overlooking, there's already windows at first floor level, so the windows in the dormer are not going to cause any more or no significant additional overlooking than the existing windows already do. And the windows on the side elevation are to be obscure glazed, and they're conditioned to be as well. So, yeah, and in terms of the dormer utilises the roof space and doesn't project above the main roof ridge. So there's not going to be any loss of light from the dormer either. So that covers overlooking and loss of light.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Slinger.
Thank you very much for the presentation. And I agree with Councillor Daly that the inclusion of the percentages of HMOs is very helpful. So thanks for that. Can I ask, do you know whether a 4.3% figure for the street, for the percentage of HMOs in that street, is how that fits to, let's say, a league table among other streets in the urban area? Do you happen to know whether that 4.3% is the highest, or is it middle ranking?
This is my opinion. I would say it's mid to high on the rankings. I think this has got 7 registered HMOs, but then the street is very large. It's got 186 separate residential properties. So if you take that into account, it would probably be quite low compared to as a percentage. But yeah, the number is mid to high.
And can I come back, Chair? Thank you, Chair. And just for the record, it's the case, isn't it, that there is no upper limit on the number of HMOs that could be granted. That could be up to 90, 100% even, if those applications met the criteria and were approved by the committee. There is no upper limit at present because there is no reference to HMOs in the local plan.
Essentially, yes, we have to we have to determine the application in accordance with the local plan. Our local plan doesn't have any sort of upper limit, as you put it.
Councillor Mrs. Barrow.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to return to Councillor Daly's point about the licensed HMOs in Grosvenor Road. It's actually listed at 3.2. How many occupants there are in the 7 HMOs that are actually licensed in that road, and you'll see from that that the permitted occupants start at 5 and go up to 8 in that particular road. Thank you.
Was that any other further points of clarification, or can we move on to the speakers? It sounds like we've got 2 speakers on this one, so we've got Mr. Carl Hardwick, and you've got 3 minutes.
Good evening. Firstly, I'm here and speaking for and on behalf of our Grosvenor Road community and the many residents who have objected to this planning application and who will continue to object to the loss of much needed affordable family homes, loss of the community and the increase in transient residents within the area. We particularly object to the imbalance of HMOs which fall within the Grosvenor Road area and the issues this causes. On this matter, we'd like to refer to point 3.2, which states 7 licensed HMOs are based in the road, but these do not include number 50, which was recently turned into an 8-bed HMO, or the many unlicensed HMOs along the road. We do feel that the figures need to be re-looked at prior to any final decision being made. We also bring to attention that numbers 50 and 52 have already been turned into HMOs, and plans are afoot to purchase and change number 48 into a HMO, all by the same developer. This will lead to a block of 4 houses in a row, all becoming HMOs, and all 5 houses, 44 to 52, seemingly having to all use the one entry between 44 and 46 for bin access. Parking is a huge issue for residents, and whilst permits have been in effect during the day, this does not help the residents when they come home at night after work to find that every space has been taken, including on double yellow lines and corners, making turning into or out of Grosvenor Road dangerous. Residents at work later often have to park streets away, as after 8 p.m, the road becomes a free-for-all, and this is only exacerbated by the increase in residents and their visitors. Point 14.6 states that building work is temporary, yet as each of the properties detailed have taken up to a year to complete, this has been an ongoing disturbance and will continue to be for a considerable time should this application and that of the next one, number 46, be agreed. The building work, whilst we agree is of high standard and carried out by polite and considerate workers, still has an adverse effect on the street and its residents. Pavements have to be dug up, skips and lorries have been parked in the much needed parking spaces, and building work has taken place outside of the permitted times. And with all of that work comes the associated noise pollution. We, as a collective, do not have an issue with HMOs. We do not have an issue with this developer or the residents that wish to sell their family homes to them and move out of the street. We understand their reasoning. Their reasoning is why we are here, that we don't want to be hemmed in by HMOs, that they didn't want to be hemmed in by HMOs, and neither do we. We purchased homes in a street full of community spirit, and this is fast being eroded. Whilst we're aware this is not a planning consideration, we feel it should be said that the heart of Rugby is being lost to houses and multiple occupancy, transient residents, and the transformation of homes into houses that will never be able to be returned to much needed family accommodation due to the sheer size of the extensions that are being proposed by the developer. Please consider our points above on HMO numbers, parking, road safety and building work disturbance, but also please think about our town's heart. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for that presentation. Members, have we got any points of clarification we want to come back up from the Mr. Hardwick? No? Councillor Slinger.
I would just like to thank you for raising the concerns of residents of Grosvenor Road. I think it's very important that members of the committee hear those concerns, and you've alluded to the fact that many of those issues are not easy to be taken into consideration as planning considerations, but nonetheless I think it should inform our debate, and thank you.
Just one point of clarification for members, and I hope I don't sound like a broken record. Whilst we've heard a little bit about the potential future plans for properties on the street, whilst they are still speculative, they are not a material planning consideration, so members must disregard those and assess it as the current situation on the ground.
Okay, we've got our next speaker, Mrs. Rebecca Walker.
Hello, hi. I'll speak very quickly. So I just want to address some of the objections that have come up. There's a lot to cover, so I'll try and speak very, very quickly. To do with the character of the area, a HMO is still a dwelling. This is a residential area, and it's still going to be a dwelling. My client's properties are always finished to a very, very high standard. He fully refurbs them inside and out, exceeds building regulations, and it's not going to devalue the area. If anything, the properties look a lot better than they did before. The extension's very, very small, so there's no impact on privacy or overlooking. My client, as well, is running the building company. They run the management company. They only accept single occupants because they find that a lot easier to manage than couples, to be honest. So even though it's going to be a 7-bedroom HMO, it's for 7 people. That is all. There's not going to be 14 people there. It's definitely not going to reduce house prices in the area. These properties went up for sale. Locals could have bought them if they wanted to keep them as a house. I want to stress it is fully in accordance with all planning policies. It's in accordance with SDC1 and the MPPF. And also to look at the other matters. So matters have been raised to do with loss of community and antisocial behaviour. I want to stress the point that I think there's an unfounded blinkered stigma to do with HMOs, that they attract a certain type of person. And I think that needs to be looked at by councillors because they aren't always the sort of people you would think they are. They aren't people who create antisocial behaviour, littering. Often they're very, very hard-working people. At the minute in Rugby, there's a housing shortage, as I'm sure you all know. The average rental price for a 1-bedroom flat is £700. When you add bills onto that with the recent rise of 80%, you're looking at well over £1,000 a month. These rooms are rented at £550 a month, which is affordable. So I'm trying to rush it. You can't buy 1-bedroom flats in Rugby. You're looking at around, again, £130,000 to buy a 1-bed flat. And a lot of single people cannot afford this, basically. With the cost of living crisis, HMOs are absolutely essential. They're very, very much needed. And when you think about the stigma that's put to them, so yes, my client does own other HMOs on the street. He has got, at the minute, a chemist, a dentist, a warehouse worker, a teaching assistant, and many other key workers in those properties. They're not always the type of people you would think they were. There's been no complaints about antisocial behaviour from any of his properties, and if there were, they'd be dealt with by the management company. If this was a house or a flat, there'd be no management to deal with that. Their management company are very, very strict because he prides himself on high-quality properties. I'm not sure what littering has got to do with HMOs. They've got a full bin store at the back. These people are hard-working. They're not people on benefits. They're people who are working, so they're not standing on the streets throwing their litter around. And to do with noise and disturbance, you're talking about 7 strangers. They're not going to be partying. They haven't got children. So a lot of the concerns, I think...
You've just come to the end of your time.
So
sorry.
Just to summarise, basically...
No, you're finished.
Oh, sorry, that's me
really
done.
Sorry.
It's not enough time.
You did well. You did well. You covered a lot of points.
Very, very quickly.
So, members, have we got any points of clarification?
Just for members' benefits, again, the identity of the tenants and occupiers of those HMOs are not a material planning consideration. Thank you.
Councillor Sanderson.
Yeah, just point of clarification. You mentioned the letting agent. Is that letting agent willing to accept all the conditions that the licensing authority would comply? Because I think that's the most important thing. Licensing's not our job.
Yes, am I answering? Yes, they are, and they also, as I say, they have the condition because the building company are also the management company. They completely run them, and they run them very, very strictly, and they're to a very, very high standard. and they take on board fully the licensing. And as I said, they do not want couples, they want single working people, because they've had couples before and they've found it problematic. So everybody who is in their HMO are working single people, and they have single parents in there that cannot afford to rent a house in Rugby at the minute. They can't afford to buy a house. So these properties are needed, and the stigma around them needs to move. Single parents.
Do you mean lone?
Single
Okay.
people who are trying to save money to move on and go somewhere else. So,
Right, thanks for that. Thanks for that. Any further points of clarification from members? Councillor Slinger.
Yep, thank you for your presentation, which was interesting. Does your client believe that there is any, as it were, upper limit on the number of properties on a given road that he or she would want to develop into a 7 or larger 7-bed or larger HMO? And given all of the ways in which your client, according to you, manages these properties, which I don't doubt, presumably there would be no upper limit in his or her view.
there is no upper limit according to planning, as the planning officer has said. So whether it be this road or any road, yes, there is no limit on HMOs. But that, I don't see what relevance that has to do with this, to be honest. Because yes, there is no limit. I think the important factor is if there is under 6 bedrooms, it doesn't need planning. So that's a bigger policy thing than.
Okay.
Than this.
Thanks for that. Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Sling. Any further points of clarification from members? No? Okay. Can we move into debate now then? We've got any speakers? Councillor Bill Lewis.
Yeah, sorry, this isn't debate really. It's a question which is puzzling me. In 3 different places in the report, first of all, I wanted to thank the officer for the report on the previous one. There's a lot of work gone into that, thank you. The reference number is different in the different parts of the report. On page 19 is given as R2210 1081. On page 26, it's referred to as R221061 and also R221961.
The correct reference number is 1081.
1081.
Yeah.
Just we know which one we're voting on. So.
Just to clarify, the reference number is R22/1081. So anything else in the report is the wrong number. Have we got any? Councillor Willis.
Just very quickly, Chair, I was happy with the previous application we heard to be quite scathing in my criticism of the Highway Authority. I think I need to be equally scathing, indeed, of ourselves as the Planning Authority. We do not have a policy in place to manage this. We can talk upper limits all night, but until we get that policy in place, that is what we will do, talk about it. So as a collective, ladies, gentlemen, members, officers, let's get on with it, eh?
Councillor Mrs. Barrow.
Thank you, Chair. Just one quick question. Rebecca has told us that her client will only let 2 single people. If there was an occasion in any of the properties when they actually went over the number of permitted occupants, who would deal with that enforcement? Is that the planning enforcement officer that would take a look at that?
So enforcement could be dealt with through planning or through licensing, depending on their license. So if they had more than 7 occupants, then we could enforce that. Yeah.
Councillor Mrs. Brown.
Thank you. I agree with Councillor Lewis. Every time there's an application for an HMO, we revisit the fact that it doesn't appear in the local plan. And potentially we've heard every house in that street could be turned into an HMO in anybody's street. You may think it's a remote possibility. I'm not sure. Every HMO you put in changes the... Sorry, can't you hear me? It's not like me. Usually, every HMO you put into a road, you change the nature of that road. So it's quite a careful consideration that we have to give every time this comes up. If there's no ground rule in the local plan, I can't make a decision. So what I'm proposing is that we defer. It's quite a radical decision. We keep hold of any decision on HMO licensing until we've got to the local plan and reviewed it. Because until then, we have just got this same wrangle every time. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to come back on that point, Councillor Brown. Unfortunately, that's not something we could recommend that members do. The MPPF is very clear that we must, where we have proposals that accord with our current development plan, i.e. the local plan, we must determine those applications without delay if they do comply with it. And obviously in this case, they do comply with our current adopted local plan. So therefore it would be unreasonable to withhold them, and obviously if the applicant went to appeal, we could then be obviously subject to costs application in that particular case. Obviously, as I've mentioned before, at past committees, we are very well aware, officers, that this is an area which our current local plan is lacking in policy. We have started gathering evidence. We have had independent consultants produce a report that has suggested policies going forward, but unfortunately we can't introduce a policy as part of a say supplementary planning document. It has to be part of a local plan, and obviously that review process will start in due course as we plan for the future. But at the moment we have to determine each application in accordance with the current development plan.
Thank you for that, Richard. Councillor Slinger again.
Thank you, Chair. I propose that we defer on this particular application in order to get more information about the number of HMOs of all categories in Grosvenor Road. And also, that's the main grounds for deferment. And I'd ask the officer for the officers any clarification on when such further research could be arrived at.
Yeah, Councillor Slinger, actually while people were talking, I've checked the public register. The last one that was done via licensing was in October 2022. I have noticed 50 Grosvenor Road is not listed on there, so that is that would make the number 8. And I guess the number 9, which one of the speakers was talking about, was in reference to number 48 Grosvenor Road. But then obviously we heard that was a potential one, so it isn't one in place. So I don't know if we deferred it whether I would have any further update than what I'm actually telling you now, because I've obviously just researched it as we spoke.
Thank you very much. I am aware that there is further research being undertaken by the council, as I understand it, into HMOs that may or may not be the unlicensed ones as well. And it would be useful to be able to determine those numbers as well on that particular road when we're thinking about an application which is for a licensed HMO.
Again, obviously, that is, I assume, work being undertaken by our licensing team in connection with that. As the present officers mentioned in his presentation, HMOs up to 6 individuals don't require planning permission, so we won't have a record of those if they are in existence. The best thing we have is our registered public register of HMOs, and as I've said, I've done a search, and obviously it's mentioned. I know that number 50 has had planning permission granted earlier last year. For an 8-bed HMO, so that is one that is in addition to the figures that were quoted. But obviously it sounds like there's other separate work going on which will be done by our licensing team. But again, based on what I said before, it probably would be unreasonable, in my opinion, to defer the application for that sole reason. But it's that sort of evidence that will help formulate any future policies going forward. But obviously that does take time.
Councillor Sanderson. And then
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Sanderson first.
Thank you, Chair. Am I right in thinking that if a council is silent on a policy, then we automatically refer to National Planning Policy Framework and its guidance to us on development. Once we've actually started a study, a proper study, then that becomes a material consideration. But as we hasn't actually started a study, then it can't be taken into consideration. We can't defer to this tonight because the applicant would have every right to appeal against our decision. And the national policy framework actually trumps our local considerations.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Yes, you're correct on the point. If the local plan is silent on and there are no relevant development plan policies, then we must have to take that into account and also then obviously approve without delay on the proposal. In terms of HMOs going forward, sorry, the second part of your question was emerging policy. Thank you. Was that obviously we'll be taking that into account when emerging policy in connection with thank you. Yes, we have had the evidence that we've already done work on the HMOs, as I mentioned, with the independent consultant, but that produces an evidence base for our local plans. At the moment, it's not had the scrutiny of going through a local plan process or out to public consultation or anything like that, which it would do as part of a local plan process. So although we're gathering this evidence, as we will be for many other elements when reviewing the local plan, we can't rely on that at the moment if the application went to appeal. So unfortunately, we would have to just rely on our SBDs and our local plans that have been through that full consultation process. Sorry for the start of that.
Okay, have we got any further speakers? Oh yeah, Councillor Spastava.
Thank you, Chair. I think a number of significant people, residents who live in the area, are concerned about the degradation of the area due to the increase in amateur. And this is happening more and more. And also there is a kind of a not clear identification where the licensing issues, how that can be controlled. And I know implementation stage, a lot of residents find it very difficult. A lot of issues like parking here, a lot of issues like antisocial behavior has been degraded. So I think we certainly need a policy as soon as possible, and then we can make a better decisions. And I think it will be appropriate to defer this in this consideration, because more and more applications are coming, and we should have we owe some consideration for residents of your view. We are local representative. And local development is very important. So I think we need to consider that. Thank you.
No, thank you, Councillor, and I think it's a point that's been made by many councillors, not just at this committee. Obviously, we are in a position where the legislation is that the government feels that up to 6 occupants in a dwelling house living as an HMO is acceptable in planning terms and doesn't require us to have to consider an application for it. But obviously, once we have our policies in place, then when we get applications for more than 6, as we have done tonight, then we can obviously give that further weight and further consideration.
And just to reiterate the point that Richard made earlier in relation to the deferment, as officers, again, would strongly advise against it. It does open ourselves up to unreasonable behaviour and costs on appeal.
Okay, well, we've got 2 options open to us by the looks of things, which is one is to approve it or the other to refuse it. If we approve it, we can attach all the conditions and informatives, and that has some bearing on keeping the development times to a window to not annoy neighbours and such like. So from the chair, I'm going to move approval. Councillor Mrs Moudis.
I'm happy to second your recommendation, Chair.
Okay. We got any further speakers, or do we move to the vote? Looks like we're going to move to the vote. Those in favour of approval, please show. And those against, please show. Any abstentions? Please show. 1 abstention. So that's approved. Yes, I know it's a very difficult one. I know it's a difficult one for neighbours, but we're going to be getting on the case, aren't we, officers? We're going to get on the case and get the policies in place. Okay, we've got Sam Green presenting the next one, which is land opposite Draycott Water, Southam Road. Draycott, well, we know where it is, don't we? But just next to the golf course and or the reservoir.
Good evening, everyone. This presentation is for outline permission for R22/0771, land opposite Draycott Water, Southam Road, Rugby. This application seeks outline planning permission with all matters reserved for the construction of up to 18 holiday lodges, and it is identical to the scheme previously approved under R18/0829. Just to reiterate, layout, scale, appearance, access and landscaping are to be considered under a further reserved matters application if members are minded to approve the application. The application is being reported to Planning Committee in accordance with 5.23c of the Scheme of Delegation for applications included within the definition of major developments. The above site images show the site. To the left, we have an aerial image of the site. It can be seen the perimeter has the boundary screening by vegetation. And to the right, we have the site in relation to Draycott Water and Thurleston and Dunchurch. This development does have a relevant planning history, notably R18/0829, which is an identical application that was previously approved. Development for this permission and the reserve matters application were not started within the condition timeframe and therefore forms the reasoning for the resubmission. There is also an approved application for the Centre of Rural Excellence, which has been certified as extant under a lawful development certificate under R19/0006. The illustrative block plan shows the 18 holiday lodges which are situated in the western position within the site. The block plan also shows the relation to the potential development of the Centre of Rural Excellence, which again is an extant permission. Just again to note, this is only an illustrative at this stage, and this permission is to establish the principle for the lodges only. The illustrated plans have also been included to demonstrate how the lodges may eventually look, which is a reserved matter at this stage, but it does help to build an idea of the eventual development. The lodges potentially would include an external deck area, a kitchen, dining and living room, 2 bedrooms and a shower room. In terms of the consultation process, there was an objection received from the Parish Council in terms of a request for more details for the lodges, which will occur at the reserve matter stage, and a concern with the impact on highway safety, which is to be further assessed at the reserve matter stage. There were no technical objections received, subject to the conditions. For the key considerations, the principle of development, the proposal is located in a countryside location where new development will be resisted. Only where national policy on countryside location allows will development be permitted. Local Plan Policy ED4 states that certain forms of development and uses are acceptable in principle, both inside and outside the urban area. This includes small-scale tourism, visitor accommodation and leisure-based uses. This is subject to the content of the other policies in the local plan. Policy ED4 stresses that schemes will be assessed against the impact that is likely to be caused to the character of the local area, as well as the benefit that would arise for rural communities, businesses and the wider local economy. In terms of national policy, the framework within paragraph 84 for supporting a prosperous rural economy states that planning decisions should enable sustainable growth and expansion of all types of business in rural areas, both through conversion of existing buildings and well-designed new buildings, and sustainable rural tourism and leisure developments which respect the character of the countryside. Within the previous officer report for the previously granted permission, it was stated that for the application of the CRE, it was established that provision of a tourist facility would be in principle acceptable on this site. The previous officer report for the previous application stated that the holiday lodges would be integral to the centre of rural excellence. Therefore, the proposed holiday lodges would help to support a prosperous rural economy by enabling the sustainable growth and expansion of the CRE. This would be achieved by expanding the elements on offer at the centre and the linkages with the existing surrounding established recreational and leisure uses, and thus enabling a sustainable rural tourism and leisure development which fully respects the character of the countryside. Furthermore, the proposal will help to grow the visitor economy in the borough and the county through the provision of rural holiday accommodation and the development of the rural attraction. Although an extant permission does exist, the potential for the lodges as an isolated application, if the CRE was never fully to be developed, must also be assessed. In this case, the proposed lodges would still support tourism and leisure for the rural locality. It is, however, considered that permanent dwellings would not be considered acceptable, and therefore a condition has been worded to safeguard this. This does differ from the original permission that and decision notice that you would have seen. So the condition now requires an up-to-date register of the names of owners and occupiers of the individual lodges on site and made available to the local planning authority. So I'll just read that amended condition out loud for members now. The lodges shall be occupied for holiday purposes only. The lodges shall not be occupied as a person's sole or main place of residence. The owners/operators of the site and/or the individual lodges shall maintain an up-to-date written register to include the names and main home addresses of the owners of each of the that should read lodges on site, the details of every occupier of each of the individual lodges to include their main home addresses and the weeks which they occupied the lodge. This information will be made available at all reasonable times to the local planning authority, with a complete copy of the register being submitted to the local planning authority no later than 28 days at the end of the calendar year. This is in tandem with condition 8, which will now read, each lodge hereby approved shall not be occupied for more than 11 months during any calendar year. And this again is in principle to prevent the holiday lodges from becoming a permanent residence or dwelling. As there has been no significant changes relevant to the previously used policies in the updated MPPF and the local plan, the current officer accepts that the original assessment is still applicable, and it is therefore considered that the proposal is in principle acceptable and complies with national and local policy, subject to all planning matters being appropriately addressed within the principal assessment and the reserve matters stage. On to character and design. Policy SD1 seeks to ensure that design is of high quality, and Policy ED4 requires an assessment into the impacts on the character of the area. While it is accepted that the introduction of the lodges would alter the appearance of the once open field, it is considered within the proposed location, being positioned away from the highway, it would be considered this is a sympathetic location within the site. It is also considered that the lodges would integrate well with the CRE or individually, A condition will be included to ensure the final design, positioning and scale of all buildings are acceptable. The addition of further landscaping will help to screen the site and will also positively enhance the site, which is also secured under condition. In terms of impact on residential amenity, the proposed site is located well away from any neighbouring properties. The property is located to the west at the entrance of Draycott Water, approximately 250 metres away. It is therefore considered that the proposed lodges would not impact on the amenities of any neighbouring properties, which will be required to assess once the reserved matters application is received. In conclusion, it is considered that the proposal is in accordance with paragraph 84 of the MPPF and local plan policy ED4 in relation to supporting a prosperous rural economy and tourism outside of the urban area, and therefore the application is in principle acceptable. Further from this, as there have been no significant changes to national policy or local plan policy, the principle is established under the same assessment as the original application, which is no longer extant. The character and design and impact on residential amenity at this stage is also considered to be acceptable, and no technical consultee took a stance of objection, subject to the conditions being applied to any subsequent decision notice. Due to this being an outline permission, in terms of the reserved matters, layout, scale, appearance, access and landscaping, these will be assessed once the reserved matters application is submitted. However, it is considered by the officer that there is potential for these matters to be achieved to a standard which is satisfactory to the local planning authority. Accordingly, it is considered that the application is in accordance with the National Planning Policy Framework and the local plan, and it is therefore recommended that the outline application should be approved subject to the conditions. Thank you.
Right, thanks for that, Sam. Have we got any points of clarification for the officer? Councillor Toby Lawrence.
My clarification, I think, is around, right, these will be holiday accommodations. What if that business ceases and these become unoccupied? Are we creating any precedents here for those then creating planning for that they can be converted to another use afterwards?
So at the minute we only have an outline application, and what you would be approving is a principle for a holiday lodge. So in terms of creating another dwelling which is safeguarded under condition while they're in operation, it would be required to come in for a change of use to change these two dwellings, and that would be made an assessment then. We do have policy within the open countryside that new development would likely be resisted.
Any further points of Councillor Slinger?
Yeah, thank you, Sam. On the point about 11 months out of any 12-month period, you have to forgive my ignorance on this, but is that a fairly standard approach to such lodge developments? Is my first question, but I have a second question.
So in terms of the outline application that was originally approved, there was a condition on there which specified the month of February. This is the main principle for and the reasons for these conditions being put in place is to protect the lodges from becoming a dwelling, from anyone permanently occupying these lodges, and creating a precedent for a dwelling to be put in place. So originally it was put in place that it was the month of February. This condition was reworded as stated under the amended slide. That was to create a more reasonable condition for the operation of a business, just from the point of view that someone may want to go on holiday in February.
And just for clarification, it is a condition that we try to include on all applications of this type. Yeah, so that together with the condition around keeping the register and it not being a sole or principal home, then those two work together and they're relatively standard.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sam. And my second question was around the precedent that may be set for this kind of use of land. Now, as you pointed out, it's 250 metres away from the nearby dwellings. it achieves all of the other objectives and doesn't contravene any rules, etc. But how do you as a planning authority, how do we as a planning authority prevent such developments happening, you know, dotted around an area like Draycote?
So we do obviously have the policy GP2, which is sets the sequential favourability for dwellings to be put in place. That policy would give basis to refuse applications for dwellings, and may have been the case on this site because of that policy for a reason. In terms of setting a precedent, we do have to judge each case as it comes in on its own merits. In this case, the merits of this application are the fact that it's holiday lodges and the rural prosperous economy. So I do take your point, obviously, and it is recognised that the contrast between an open field and holiday lodges is recognised. It's just seen under the assessment that it's not significant enough to create a reason to warrant a refusal in this case, or the prior application beforehand.
You've got no... Councillor Sanderson, we're still on points of clarification.
It is a point of clarification. This site is recognised for its wildlife habitat and wildfowl use. And clearly it's also recognised as having quite a very large population of midges which the wildlife feed upon. My concern is that you already have some residential accommodation in that area. If one adds additional residential accommodation in that area, aren't you taking away the whole raison d'etre of the Draycote water as a habitat?
So are we strictly talking in terms of a biodiversity point of view? So yeah, on the decision notice, you will have to forgive me for just reminding myself with the numbers. Obviously you will have to forgive myself while I just go through the numbers again, but we did obviously consult ecology and the arboricultural officer from a biodiversity point of view. They didn't take a stance of objection to the application on the grounds of biodiversity. There is a condition in regards to ground clearance and protected species. There is also some landscape, the landscaping which will be reviewed under the reserve matters, but for a arboricultural method statement to be put in place, that will be for the protection of the relevant trees where deemed fit by the officer. And I think that, yes, and a combined ecological and landscaping scheme as well under another condition. So in terms of biodiversity, it basically has been reviewed by the people in the areas of expertise, and they didn't find any reason to warrant a refusal as long as these conditions are complied with.
They clearly commented and had originally objected.
Sorry, I'll clarify that.
A bit more clarification.
Yes, there was no objection subject to the conditions being put in place. So without these conditions, there would be an objection. As the conditions are in place, they don't object to the
So if these conditions are not met, this development will not happen?
It has to be met because the condition is in place.
Mm-hmm.
Councillor Toby Lawrence, then Councillor Bill Lewis.
A question really on the environmental impact. This is going into land of pasture, so we're building on what would be seen as greenfield. When we've seen other applications through where there's been, after a certain number of years, this could be returned back to being green again. So there's been a life put upon this. Is that a possibility in this case of saying that this is something that would have to be re-granted planning permission in a certain time period?
Yeah, through you, Chair. I mean, it is the gift of the members to grant a temporary planning permission for development, but there's obviously got to be good grounds for doing that. You sometimes get that because you may not know the full implications of a development before actually the scheme comes before us. But obviously in doing so, there's obviously a lot of investment that would have to go into actually setting up this site for 18 holiday lodges. So, the question would be, well, why would we be granting that? I mean, in the cases where we do grant temporary, it's safe in connection with a rural dwelling where someone might be trying to run a farm or start up a farm business, and they're trying to justify there's a financial and functional need for having a dwelling on site. So sometimes we would grant that, say, temporary for 3 years to make that business become established, to see whether or not we would then look at a temporary permission. But we're not dealing with that here. What we're dealing with is a proposal to actually I suppose benefit our rural tourism. Obviously Draycott Water itself is one of our key assets in terms of tourism. So obviously, what is before us is an outline application to establish the principle, and then obviously then a subsequent reserve matters application will come in with the detail. So obviously, what's been submitted is for a permanent situation, not a temporary. So obviously, once this is granted, then subject to reserve matters, it is then there in perpetuity. And in my view, would probably be unreasonable to do on a temporary basis, because the question would be, well, what are we actually seeking in that, say, 3-year period?
If I can respond, I was actually thinking more of a 10-year period. I think when we looked at the solar farm, I think it was something like a 30-year period was talked about that. My concern is primarily that this business doesn't succeed. We want it to succeed, so please don't take that away. But if it should not, we would be left with ruined properties which are just decaying on what would have been otherwise pasture. So it was that level of protection that I think I was talking about. And if I can raise while I'm talking, the second thing really is just that then I've mentioned this before, green construction. What can be done to make this as green as possible in terms of how it's put down, so we don't put a load of concrete plinths underneath these just because they're raised the whole lot of concrete. Okay, so.
I mean, in terms of the green construction, I know that's been mentioned before in applications. Again, then we can put informative on with regard to that, because we are dealing with sort of holiday lodges here rather than actual dwellings. So there's probably well, I am aware there are different building regulation requirements. They're less stringent for this type of thing compared to actual permanent built thing with foundations. But again, that's something we could ask the applicants to be sort of mindful of in their, and in some good practice in their construction techniques, and limit the amount of concrete that they perhaps put down. In terms of the future, I mean, you could apply this to many applications that we get, particularly in the rural area. At the end of the day, obviously, we would like the business to succeed. Obviously, unfortunately, in some cases that doesn't happen. But obviously, then we would be dealing with perhaps further applications, or or different proposals that may come forward. But the difficulty is to speculate what may happen. We have to treat it at face value and assume that they've put a business case together and they've worked it out before applying for planning permission in the first place. But I appreciate there can be factors that may be unknown to us all.
Sanderson again.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh. Sorry, Councillor Sanderson, we've missed out Councillor Lewis. Do you want to go ahead then?
John, are you happy? Yeah. With regard to temporary applications, we have, and I'm thinking of a number of static homes in rural areas, limited those developments to 3 and 5 years. I think that then, when we've done that, it sort of says, if you're going to come forward with it, which these cabins are just a form of static home anyway, they're just a bit smaller. If we did look to go on giving a temporary 3 to 5 years application approval, temporary, there was nothing stopping the applicant coming back at a later stage with a formal application for a permanent set of cabins. That way we haven't locked ourselves into a long-term planning application, and they haven't locked themselves into an agreement that won't progress.
I mean, I understand what you're saying, Councillor. I think, again, it's why are we actually putting on a temporary permission? You know, what would we be seeking at the end of that 3-year period? What information have you not got at the moment that perhaps questions, I don't know, deliverability of the scheme? I mean, I think with regard to what you're mentioning about other static accommodation that we have elsewhere in the borough, I think a lot of sites are in the green belt. This isn't. So that, I think, is one of the other reasons why, you know, those particular applications may have a temporary permission, because also maybe down to the nature of the occupants. But obviously, this is what we're dealing with here is a holiday lodge, obviously, application, and we have to treat it at face value. But as I started right at the beginning and saying, you know, members, you know, it is in your gift if you did want to put on a temporary permission for 3, 5 or 10 years, you know, that was in your gift, but we have to be very clear about why are we doing that, so it's very clear to the applicant, because obviously they would then have to reapply, and it may, you know, stifle, you know, them coming forward or investing in the site because of the uncertainty that may create.
Just one point on that, Richard. Where we've had temporary permissions on sites, there's also been conditioned with you will put the land back in a condition once you found it, which is what I would add to this. It may not be in the green belt, but it's definitely in open countryside.
Just one point to add on to that, I think we also need to be mindful of how we've treated other holiday lodge and tourism applications in the open countryside previously, where we haven't sought to limit them to a temporary nature or haven't assumed that the business may or may not fail. And I think you need to be careful about the speculation you're applying to this and your consistency of decision making, because if we put a condition on with a time limit that say it's for 3, 5, 10, 20 years, whatever it might be, the applicant is open to appeal that condition specifically to get it removed. So it doesn't necessarily solve the issue you're looking at. So I think you do need to be mindful about your consistency of decision making as how you've approached other rural tourism applications of this nature.
Carry on. We've just got the officer to respond.
Yeah, I'd just like to go off the back of what Sarah said and just offer a point of clarification here, and it relates to the consistency of decision making. So just in terms of the site, a large part of the site is already due to be developed into the CRE, and it is just the western position on the site that was shown on the illustrative map that will have the lodges on. So in terms of the CRE, that has been approved. It is extant and can go ahead. And the previous application, although now not extant, also didn't carry that temporary permission for an identical scheme in exactly the same location on the site.
Okay, let's. Oh, Councillor Lewis. Yes, we haven't forgotten about you, Councillor Lewis.
It's not the first time you've ignored me. Actually, perhaps I shouldn't have let Councillor Sanderson go first. I had a point of clarification, which I believe we're still on clarifications, aren't we? And then I had a request. Well, the clarification was in relation to Councillor Lawrence's first question. He asked what would happen if they went bust, basically. And just to follow on from that, is there a requirement that they're asked to remove any of the structures they've put in as part of the just assume we go ahead with the outline and the detailed application?
There isn't anything in place currently on the decision notice that would require that. I don't know whether you want to pick up on the business point, Richard.
I was only just going to add to that. There's, like with many firms, there wouldn't necessarily be a requirement if they've gone bust. I'd also think that we may be in a difficult position if they've gone bust. They wouldn't necessarily have any resources to then restore the land to its former debate. So we may be in a position of dealing with administrators or whatever. So, and that would obviously be outside planning, but we wouldn't normally put that restriction on in terms of holiday lodges, because, as I said, we would treat the application at face value and hope that it would be a viable business. However, if they wanted to change the permission to something else because the business had failed, then obviously that would then be a change of use, and we would have to consider it at the time as a local planning authority.
Okay, thank you.
Do
The
you want
request
further
I've got, shall I leave that for the moment and come back to it?
Okay, let's move into the debate then, shall we? Unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember when Draycott Reservoir was actually constructed, and a massive amount of habitat that was lost in that construction. But what we've got now, it's created yet more habitat. So you do tend to find that construction in some places can actually create habitat for wildlife. So I know there's debate about giving this a temporary period of up to 10 years. I don't know whether Councillor Toby Lawrence would want to make that a possible part of the recommendation for approval.
If I can reply to that, Chair, I think I'm satisfied with that. It doesn't serve any purpose. It was more to have that debate about whether that would be a useful tool to do. I think I would actually want to move this to approval with that addition of informative around green construction, and leaving you to, as the officers, to word that accordingly.
That's great. No, I don't mind seconding that, and I know this is only an application. I'm sure when we get to the nitty-gritty, we're going to make sure that they are absolutely built in a green way, in a sustainable way. And have we got any further speakers? We've got a mover and a seconder. We've got Councillor Sanderson again.
I have one concern, Chair. It was the final comments the officer just made, was we've gone from having a greenfield site to a site in the open countryside to a site that will then be a brownfield site in the open countryside should the business fail. That's what's concerning me. It's a lot of open green space in the countryside. We are losing it at a phenomenal rate. With the new changes the government's got coming down the line, we could be seeing an awful lot more open countryside disappear. So that's what I'm mindful of. I appreciate the thing about leisure and tourism, but I've seen an awful lot of campsites go to the wall over the years.
Councillor Bill Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. The request was if we go ahead and we approve the outline planning application tonight, there are a number of other details that are mentioned as highway safety, and in the report there's also discussion about the proximity of the cabins to some quite important trees. Just a request whether we can ask for the reserve matters application to come back to committee, which it doesn't always happen in view of that.
I think it would obviously be in the gift of councillors at the time to obviously call that application back in when that comes in. That's the practice thing that we've normally done. So obviously if the application did come back in, then because I'm conscious that we may have different committees or officers at the time, because obviously we've got up to 3 years when this application potentially can come back in. So, but yes, obviously that's one of the things. Because reserve matters applications don't normally come back to committee unless actually called in, but obviously it's within members' gifts to call that in if they feel that's necessary at the time.
Yes, thank you, Richard. I was aware of the fact they don't normally come in, but we have asked for that in the past for some applications, and I thought in this one it could be quite useful. Yeah.
That was an interesting one. Right, so we've got any further speakers? If we haven't, then we've had a proposer and a seconder for approval. All those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. Those abstained. So that is approved. Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you. So that's item 4 on the agenda finished, and now we move on to item number 5, which is advance notice of site visits. Richard, have you got any advance notice of site visits?
I have. I just have one, thank you, Chair. This is for application R22/0303. It's at land northwest of Brockhurst Lane, Monks Kirby. It's for a stables, equestrian use, menage and horse walker. The application site visitors request has come from Councillor Gillius on the grounds of impact on greenbelt, design, flooding and access. Thank you, Chair.
Are we all okay to make a site visit on that? Yeah. Can we have a show of hands for those who wish to go on the site visit? Right, I'll hold you all to that now. Let's put the microphone on. We move on then to delegated decisions. Noted? Excellent. And that then brings this planning meeting to a close. Well done, and thank you all for turning up tonight. You must all be on a bonus.